Three, two, one. All right, everybody, welcome back to Elevate Your Endgame. I'm going solo today, but not necessarily just solo. Cam is not attending, but I'm interviewing my client, an amazing friend, and a life consultant, Jeremy. Would you like to give
Okay.
a little intro to yourself, how you got into life consulting, how we got started working together?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, we actually go to the same gym,
Yep.
but I've never we go at very different times. You're a morning person. I am not a morning person. What time do you wake up?
So pre 2000 or 2022, I was getting up around like 4:50, which is a very
Wow.
early time. And I'm actually pausing at top tier for this month just to see how I do. And it has been so nice. I've been waking up at like 6:30 and I'm like, what is this? I
Nice.
get an extra hour and a half of sleep. It's amazing.
That is amazing. That's great. Yeah. So we go to the same. Well, you're taking a pause, but
Taking a
actually
pause.
found Megan through top tier social media, and so
I didn't realize
we
how
live
you
in
found
Winston.
me.
Because we've never met in
Yeah.
person.
Because I just knew that
Um,
you found me because you were thinking about for your podcast.
Uh, I found you because of what you do.
Yeah.
Because I'm in a certain career, and
Yeah.
it's a great place to be. But at the same time, I'm a person who dreams and who has things he wants to do. And my wife and I, we have things that we want to do together. We dream together. We're adventurers. I think Haley's been to now what 35 countries. I'm at 30. Like we want to have our own family business. We just think very outside the box and are wanting to do things differently. So with what you do specifically is helping people uh, kind of adjust their career, switch the career to what they really want. Would you say that's a good way? How would you say?
I would say it's to either find what you want or love what you have.
Yeah,
Because I think a lot of people just fall out of love and enjoyment in their current careers where they used to love it. And now they're like, they totally just fell out of love with the whole situation that they're in. They're burnt out. And so I help them either get back to a really good place or transition into something different.
yeah. That's really, I mean, and that's one of the reasons why I hired you.
Yeah.
And it's been really great. It's really been amazing. So,
Now, life consulting,
mhm.
different. We've talked extensively for 54 episodes about life coaching. So I
Yeah,
literally, when you put in your application, so when you do a consult with me, I have you fill out a couple questions. And I was like, what is a life consultant? I had to Google it. I was like, I don't know
yeah,
what this is. So what I Googled, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that life coaches kind of help you find the answers within yourself. With life consultants, they are giving you direct guidance to,
yeah.
it's more of a led activity between you and your consultant. What would you
Yeah.
describe it as?
Yeah, that's actually so far out of everyone I've talked to, you've done the best job
Oh, good.
describing it. That was really good. So a lot of times, a life coach is exactly what you say. It's like kind of like getting you to discover what's inside of you. It's coming out, and there's that element as well. But with life consulting, it's definitely like, hey, I've been down this path before. Let
Mhm.
me lead you there.
Yeah.
Let me take you there. And it's a lot of hand holding and walking through.
Mhm.
And so it's not quite counseling, but there is the
Mhm.
element of like helping people understand their triggers, helping people understand like what's actually going on in their inner world, and being able to realize a lot of their cycles that they developed in their
Mhm.
childhood, kind of like your programming, but then now
Yes.
it's and how it affects you today and what you can
Mhm.
do to adjust that.
And it's interesting because I think there is some overlap between the
There
consulting and
is.
the coaching world. And we've talked kind of, we have we both have had experiences that we share throughout the coaching calls and things like that. And I just like, I'm very excited for you to share not everything that you've learned, but just the stress and trigger solutions, because I think so many times in our lives, we get really stressed or we get really triggered.
Mhm.
We don't know where it's come from and we don't know what to do. So
Totally.
thank you so much for coming on and sharing that with us today. The first topic that we were going to talk about is stressing versus stretching. So I'm trying to like really
Yeah.
enunciate here. I was like, I've got like a bit of a head cold, sorry, but stressing versus stretching. So what do you think is the difference between those two?
So you're every day you're going about your life
Mhm.
and you're paying attention to everything that's happening. We've talked about this before.
Mhm.
You're receiving all of this information. And
Mhm.
right when it goes in, the first thing it does is it goes to your amygdala. And your amygdala is deciding,
Yes.
is this a threat? Is this like fight or flight kind of
Mhm.
situation? So everything, sound, sight, all of it, it's all coming in. And that happens before it gets to your critical thinking. So
Mhm.
when you're in a place, so anytime when it comes to healing like your heart, healing trauma and all of that stuff, there's the part of like sitting and grieving and all of that, but then at the same time we actually have to be able to dream. And so there's
Mhm.
that element of like, okay, I it's so many. Okay, there's, it's $1 billion industry around avoiding pain. Let's
Mhm.
go get
Buffer,
drugs. Yeah, yeah.
food.
All the things.
Mhm.
Workaholics, like all the
Mhm.
things to help you avoid what's going on. So then we've gotten, for the people who dive really deep into it, we go into this really super serious introspection.
Mm.
And it can be really unhealthy where it's like you're just constantly looking for shame. You're like, what's wrong with me? Because guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is
Yes.
something's wrong with me.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then so we go in this endless cycle. But that's not the end of it though, because part of the healing process is actually discovering what makes you come alive, what gets you excited.
Yeah.
But when you actually start to go for those things, you're going to get triggered. You're going to get
Mm.
scared. Like it's not going to, and this is something me and you have processed together and you've helped me
Mhm.
process. Because as you're going for your dreams, you're going to hit walls. You're going to find people who say things or do things. You're going to be in situations that are unfamiliar. And literally the definition of vulnerability is emotional exposure,
Mhm.
is the unknown, doing new things. So you're in this place where, I'm going to pursue a dream, I'm going to take a risk, and then suddenly your nervous system is like, red flag, stop, don't do this, because all the
Yes.
information processed by your amygdala says danger, like don't go forward.
So, and what I think is just so interesting about what you're saying is like, so when you stretch yourself to dream, when you
Hmm.
stretch yourself to become more of the person that you're meant to be in the world, a lot of the times, and you were like saying that there's just so much information that's coming at you, it's hard for your amygdala to determine whether it's a stressor that's a problem or something that is stretching you to grow. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really interesting distinction. Um, Simone Soul is another life coach who I follow and I love. And she was discussing how your vagus nerve, which
Yeah.
is right at the bottom of the base of your skull, the way that
Hmm.
that interprets things for your entire body is, I think, coming back to like that self coaching model that we've talked a lot about. It's like you have 3 million bits of information coming at you per second. How you
It's
filter
crazy.
it, that stress filtration system, it can determine that things that are stretching you to grow towards your dreams are stressful. And so you
Hmm.
have to be able to discern, is this a stretch or is this just stressing me out because it's something that I is new and different, or is it something that's
Yeah.
the wrong path? So what would
Yeah.
you like if you are feeling stressed? Would you tell people to like go in within themselves and be like, okay, is this a stress that's going to serve me, which I would call a stretch, or is this a stress that's going to maybe something that I should avoid right now, which would be something that would
Yeah.
be just a regular stress?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The first place my mind went to is kind of understanding your past and understanding
Mm,
trauma, because so many of
yes.
us carry trauma, and so the trauma, your nervous system remembers it, and it does
Hmm.
everything in its power to keep you from experiencing that again. So
Yes.
you'll be going about
Yes.
your day, that whatever that trauma was, your amygdala picks up on it, and that's why suddenly our body wants to shut down. We get triggered, and then what I do with my clients is I get them to get really good at recognizing your physical, your mental, and your emotional signs for triggers, so that
Hmm.
you can recognize when your body wants to protect you. Because what it is that when you can actually recognize that your body is wanting to protect you, you can know, and this is like the foundation with all of my clients.
Hmm.
And if your listeners got this, their
Oh
lives,
yeah.
it's going to be so vital, is like there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
And that's so vital because
Mhm.
your body is amazing and incredible and does all these wonderful things to try to keep you from danger. So when
Mhm.
your system spikes. So let's just actually, can I just describe what like some of those things might be so
I
people
was
have an
just gonna ask you
idea?
about like an example. I'm like, we're on the same
Yeah.
wavelength. I love it.
So your physical symptoms are going to be like maybe you rub your hands or your hands get
Mm,
sweaty or your shoulders get tight, your
mhm,
chest tightens, maybe you like fidget with your hair. And
mhm.
then maybe some of your emotional ones is you get butterflies in your stomach, or you feel like a bit of anxiety that comes on or sadness comes on.
Yeah, going back to physical for a second, when you're triggered, when you notice like the hair fidgeting, is it always something that is similar related to your past, do you think? Or is it something that just kind of comes up now as a natural trigger? I'm like so like interested, like because I do this thing where I tap my leg all the time. Like I'm just like a
Yeah.
tapper, but I'm like, is that a trigger? Or is that just like something that I do?
So as you get more and more aware of yourself,
Mm,
the mental, the emotional, and the physical, start paying attention to when you start to do it. Like
okay.
what was I doing before I started tapping?
When
Like
I get
what was
nervous.
going on? Okay, so
It's
you're
usually when I'm
nervous.
thinking about something that like I have to say next, or I'd like a lot of times like if I'm nervous, I do it a lot of times. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, not on coaching calls, but on consult calls sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you can ask yourself, like, well, what am I nervous about?
Ah,
And then just getting curious, like follow your curiosity. So when I'm saying follow your curiosity, the reason I say
mhm.
it in that way is because what happens is when we do start to discover that, like, oh wow, like I do get triggered more often than I think. Like maybe our
Yeah.
verbal is like, oh, I'm just so frustrated. That's actually you being triggered because you can
Hmm.
blame someone for being, oh, this person frustrates me. Well, like, no, that's something that's inside of you and it needs to be discovered. There's actually probably a trigger there.
Yeah.
Anyways, we become way more aware of those things, but when you can use the word curiosity and
Hmm.
exploration versus like the super hard introspection, being hard on ourselves,
Yeah.
critical, all of that, just following a curiosity, you can start to discover why your body's wanting to protect yourself.
Because I think what happens is I think it's a very natural reaction once we build awareness for something that triggers us to shut it down. Like to be like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I know I do this, so I'm just going to stop doing it. Whether, and I think that an alternative that could serve you even
Or
more. Yeah, go ahead.
really, or you stop what you're doing because it's causing the trigger. So maybe you're like
Yes.
shutting down the trigger
Yes.
response, or
Hmm.
you just don't pursue it. So when it comes to dreams, you're like, you know what? This
I'm just not
triggers
going to
me.
dream.
I'm not going to go it. Yeah.
So good. Well, and that's why I think it's so important instead of avoiding or shutting down those natural stress responses. I think a far better use of your time and energy is to compassionately understand where they're coming from. Because
Oh
if
yeah,
you
definitely.
don't like compassionately like look and be like, oh, and I think that you have a really, I don't know if you were going to bring in what we sometimes talk about like on our coaching calls, like the little like Megan or little Jeremy. It's like that's
Yeah.
one of those things. It's like, okay, this is just from my childhood, and I can compassionately empathize with my former self and be like, I
Mm,
understand where you're coming from, but this is the dream. And we both share that dream. You're just still a
hmm.
little scared of this dream. I know this isn't going to hurt us. So hold my hand. Let's go forward. Let's give this a try, you know?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, well said.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just like, I think it does come back to that like idea that if you are triggered, then there is that shame to it. There is
Hmm.
like that kind of at least societally in our
Well,
society. Well, I
yeah.
think there's stigmas against
Hmm.
being triggered as a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
So what would
But
you
I
say
mean,
about
it's
that?
literally like I would say that everyone has
Hmm.
some, your parents aren't perfect, you know, triggers are because of unprocessed pain and unmet need. Like you're gonna have, everyone's got it, whether they're aware of it or not. Everyone's gonna have it. But I want to say though, really quick, like I love what you're saying, what everything that you just said about the element too of like that when there's nothing wrong with you. So like when I want my clients to get to know their
Mhm.
triggers, I'm very clear, like this is not about fixing or solving your triggers,
Mm,
because then you're something to be solved. You're something to be fixed. And that's
broken.
not what we do. Yeah,
Mhm,
then you're not. And
mhm.
I mean, you've learned these things to protect yourself, but you're not a broken person. So like with
Yes.
Magnolia, um, the other
Jeremy's
day
daughter,
she was
by the way, for
yes,
the people of
Magnolia,
the
my daughter.
podcast.
She's 3.
She's the best.
Um, she's a cutie. So she has all of her big emotions. And when she has her meltdown, as every 3-year-old does, and I'm not gonna, as a dad, the biggest gift I can give my daughter is to not be triggered by her meltdowns. She
Mm,
has a
mhm.
safe place. She can express her emotions. Now, of course, I create boundaries like, hey, no hitting, no kicking. We don't yell at people. You can be upset and angry. You can let all of your emotions out. You can scream and stomp and do all of your things. Like, this is a safe place. I want her to
Mhm,
learn about her emotions and regulating and
mhm.
all of that. But I don't go in there and be like, okay, so when did this start? When did this happen, Magnolia? Can you tell me about when you first like got upset? Like, no, I don't do that. Like, I just
Yeah.
sit with her. I slow down. Even yesterday, she was having a moment. She was really upset because I think I wouldn't let her have snacks before lunch or something. I don't remember what it was. But anyways, she like has a complete meltdown. So I go into her room, I sit her on my lap and I just hold her and she's bawling, like uncontrollable. She's
Oh,
like not she doesn't have the ability to have critical thinking. She's in the downstairs brain, like fight or flight.
yeah.
So I'm just there, I'm holding her, I'm like breathing deeply. So it's like soothing. And I'm just there. I'm just with
Mhm.
her. I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to fix her. I don't have anything I want from her. And it's just
Yeah.
being there. And so often with ourselves, we're like, oh, you need to just muscle through this. You
Mhm.
need to just get into shape, or you want to shut it down, or like, oh, we end up in this endless cycle of like, when did this start? How did this happen? When it's like, actually, no, you just
Yes.
need to slow down. I'm triggered right now. So Jeremy, you're going for your dreams, or this person said this thing and it triggered this response inside of you, but we don't need to figure it out right now. Like, I'm here with you and you can take as long as you need. And I
Yeah.
understand that maybe you feel a little sad or you feel scared. And it's just slowing down and being present with those things instead
Mhm.
of trying to rush to figure everything out, because you're actually not in a clear-minded state when you're in that trigger.
Well, and I was just thinking like last night, I have a fierce independence about myself that is wonderful at times,
Yeah.
but I think it comes from lack of control in my childhood. So I seek control in situations rather
Hmm.
than thinking clearly. And coming back to like what you were saying about Noli is when we talk a lot on the podcast about your primitive brain. That's what I think you were saying, like your lower animal brain, that is what's running the show a lot of the time. And I just had an interesting thought because your prefrontal cortex, that center for logical decision making, isn't fully developed till you're 25. So
Yeah.
I'm curious. This is just I'm have no idea or scientific knowledge about this, but I'm curious as to if we hold on to triggers because our primitive brain is running the show like 80% of the time. And I think it's because we've developed these triggers at such a young age when our
Hmm.
primitive brain is running the show 100% of the time. And I'm wondering if that's why it's so important to sit with that part of your brain because it's really running the shows for so much longer and for more time. Like I don't have to think
Yeah.
about pick up pencil, put down pencil. Like that happens automatically. So I'm wondering if that's why just sitting with that part of your brain and understanding it, and not even getting into understanding it, but just sitting with it is such an important thing to do. And then I'll get into my trigger for in a second. But like, what do you think? Do you think it's because we're younger and that's why we need to sit with our younger self when we are triggered a lot of the time?
Well, in that moment, I like definitely with what you said about compassion. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't want to forget that element of like compassion heals, because what happened is a lot of times those
Mhm.
trigger responses are because of the danger that we felt we were in. The
Yeah.
the needs you had needs that you needed met. So that's
Yeah.
unconditional love, acceptance, feeling
Mm.
seen and heard and
Mhm.
safe, that you belong, that you're accepted. And as a kid, when you don't get those needs met, you shut down those needs, you come up with behavior or ways to try to get those needs met that may not be
Mhm.
super healthy. You do all of your things. Like a kid is not going to come up, a 5-year-old is not going to come up with the best way of trying to get this need met. You
Yeah.
know, they're not. So maybe it's like, I'm going to be the best student I could be. I'm going to get all A's and do everything right. And if I do everything perfect, I can earn my parents' love. And because deep down inside, there's that belief that I'm not lovable or accepted. And so we
Yeah.
do, the thing is like time and time again with my clients, no matter how amazing your parents are or what goes on, you inherit their belief systems. So now the behavior may be different and your life may be different. But
Mhm.
if your mom didn't have the gift of, feeling truly unconditionally accepted, it's going to be really difficult for her to give that to you. So you may
Yeah.
pick up on kids that they see through all the fluff because it's the day to
Yeah.
day, the daily interactions that are forming the brain. And
Mhm.
then you come up with this, you grow up while not being demonstrated that you're truly accepted. That's going to be kind of like one of our default beliefs. So like
Yeah.
if your parent can't show you that, maybe you never got physical affection, so you start coming up with these ideas of why don't I get physical affection. So maybe you shut it down, or you go head into all these like super sexual relationships because you're just so hungry for physical
Mhm.
affection. Like the
Yeah.
belief is the same, but the behaviors
The
manifest so
response is
differently.
different depending on
Hmm.
your parental situation. That's really, really interesting. And I've heard, now I have two of the best parents in the world because they are listening to this and I love them so much. And I think that a lot of my trauma came from outside of our family, which I think I'm very
Yeah.
fortunate to experience that.
Hmm.
But I've also heard of the phrase reparenting yourself. Have you ever heard
Yeah.
of that?
Hmm.
Like,
Definitely.
and I think that's like a really interesting way. Like, I'm like, because my situations were a lot of times to do with peers. So it's like refriend myself. It's like refriending myself. It's like I don't know how I would
Yeah.
reframe it in that way. But whatever caused some trauma or triggers for you in the past, if you can learn how to treat yourself the way you wanted to be treated in certain
Yeah.
times of trigger and trauma, that's the way you need to show up, not this punitive shutting down this inner deep part of yourself. It's like getting quiet
Yeah.
with you, understanding it, and being like, okay, I thank you so much for protecting me for all this time. Man, look at all the things that we've avoided. And I'm glad I think this path was exactly the way it was supposed to be. But think
Hmm.
about all this other stuff that we want to do. That's going to be really cool. So let's
Yeah.
maybe let go of this old wall, for example, like a wall that we put up, and like let's see what life could be like without it. So is that kind of how you talk people through like their situations
Yeah,
sometimes?
similar idea, different language. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And I love how you're describing it. And the my goal is that a lot of the people I work with, one of the common themes of people I work with is that they end up like neglecting themselves.
Mhm.
They've shut down their needs. They are tired of codependency. They want consistent connection. And what
Mm.
all this comes back down to is just enjoying yourself, liking yourself, loving yourself. So like again with Magnolia, I tell her not every day, almost every day. So I'm like, hey, you know that dad loves you? She's like, yeah, I know. Like she's 3 in her cute little ways. She's like, sure. And then I'm like, and you know that mom loves you? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, do you know who the most important person is that loves you? And she's like, who? I'm like,
Yourself.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Like you need to like yourself and you need to love yourself. And you're the only person that's with you for the rest of your life. No one
yeah.
else. And we go over this regularly. And so she asked me, like the other day, she asked me if I liked her dress. And of course, I'm going to come in with the follow the affirmation, like, yes, I love your dress. You have such great style. You make great decisions. You're so beautiful.
Oh, I love
All the
that.
things. Um, but after I do it, I'm like, but the most important thing, Noelle, is do you like it? And then she's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, that's the most important thing that you like it.
Mhm. And I
And
think
but go
mhm.
ahead.
I love that because you gave reasons why you liked it. You're like, you make really good decisions. You're very
Hmm.
stylish. Like you're praising things that I think are not always like tangible, but it's like it's who she is, which improves her self-concept for who she's going to show up in the world. And I think like
Yeah.
one of the things I've heard recently is like that we shouldn't say that we're like proud of ourselves, or we shouldn't say like that we love ourselves, or like we care for ourselves. And I think that's just I think it's because there's perception that if you genuinely care for yourself, then it's narcissistic. So it's almost like this is it's this, I think, thought error that we have in society. I think that when we share that we like love ourselves, it's more so I have worked so hard to do this and not hate myself every day. It's like that
Yeah.
is a huge celebration for me. And
Yeah.
it's not because I'm trying to be like, oh, I'm the best. I think that everyone is the best. I don't think that we are on different
Mhm.
parts of the playing field. I think we're at different parts in our journey, but that doesn't make one
Yeah.
person better than another. So I first off want to applaud you for that as a dad, like applauding like different parts of her and showing herself that loving herself is okay. It's not something that's ever
Mhm.
narcissistic. It's not something that is done to belittle others. It's just to celebrate who she is and the like purest essence of her, which is
Yeah.
nice. Um, and I had another thought, and it's gone. Um,
So, and unconditional love, it's not self-pity. It's not
yeah.
like, it's not sympathy. It's
Mhm.
actually like unconditionally accepting that person and being with them in the good and the bad. And that's
Yes.
like what I do with my clients is like, hey, we're going to really learn to love who you are. And then that's also loving yourself in the hard times, not just in the good
Mhm.
times. And then I've noticed that the more I grow and loving myself and being able to sit with myself, have fun with who I am, like doing the things that I enjoy. And because again, context of this is coming from a place of like trauma, where it's like
Mhm.
all those things are so unfamiliar. It creates so much healing and restoration and so many good things, but also how do I say this? I just like it. Just the more I love myself and enjoy myself, the more I can actually give out, the more empathy I actually have, the more compassion I actually have, and the better at boundaries I am. And
Yes.
my ability to show up with, okay, so this is the thing that nobody wants to do. This is why there's so many sympathy cards. It's like, hey, I know you're having a hard time. Here's a sympathy card. Good luck being over there in
Mhm.
your season. Why? Okay, like maybe you're chronically sick,
Yeah.
and people don't know how to be with someone who's chronically sick, or
Yeah.
like they're sad a lot. They want to fix it, they want to solve it, they want
Yeah.
to come up with all the solutions, when it's like actually there is no solution. there's there's nothing. And but I'm okay with pain, and I don't
Mhm.
mind sitting with you in your pain. And that's
Yeah.
true empathy. Like that's true compassion, when you can actually sit with someone where there's no solution. They don't
Yeah.
want a solution, they don't need a solution, or maybe there isn't one available, but they just need someone who's willing to sit in those uncomfortable places with them and show them compassion and unconditional love.
Yeah. And shout out to my friend Jess. She recently I've been there was something that happened and she was able to sit with me through some really, really hard stuff and share her experiences. And we just became so much closer on
Yeah.
such a deep level. And so not only like and I was able to do the same for her, like in reverse. And so the benefit of you being able to hold space for someone else, holding space for
Hmm.
yourself will bring that ability to hold space for other people. And I think
Hmm.
that relationships are the essence to this amazing human life that we get to live. And your relationships, when you're able to hold space for someone else because you've held space for yourself, they just
Yeah.
become so amplified and filled with so much love and you get to a point in your relationship that you never even knew existed, which I think is just
Yeah.
a really neat thing. Now, you talked a lot about loving yourself. Here's a really quick, interesting thought is like, what about receiving love for yourself? I
Definitely.
think that is a very different thing because someone asked me once, they're like, how do you receive love? And I was like, what do you mean receive love? But that feeling of being loved, even though I again have had a very loving, supportive family and things like that, it feels almost uncomfortable and foreign to
Hmm.
receive love and acceptance and care in some ways. And I know that this will probably resonate to you as well because it's like it's almost like it's different. It's this like idea of like being able to sit with a lot of positivity. Like, so we've discussed like sitting with your negative kind of triggered sides. I think
Hmm.
sitting with your like the positive emotions, your expands your ability to experience both the positive and the negative. And that's, I think, a skill in and of itself too, is being able to receive
Definitely.
positivity as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think of my wife, Haley, she's like a master at celebrating. Like
Yeah.
she genuinely gets so much joy in life from unconditionally celebrating people. And for her, she's like, it's because they're worth it. It's because it's a gift to her to go to these people and celebrate. And so she does amazing jobs. Sorry, she does amazing at celebrating people. Like, so my birthday, I'm just like, it was so hard in the beginning because I didn't know how to receive. She would like get my
Yeah.
guy friends, my best friends, to like
Yeah, that's
do
right.
things for me. And she's like, I'm giving them an opportunity to like to partner with like loving you, and they would get
Mm,
excited about this
mm.
opportunity. And it would be so hard for me to fathom like my guy friends coming around me to want to celebrate me and be with me. And it was like, it's the biggest slice of humble pie. Like I just was like, oh, this is really hard. But you know, I think it goes, and shout out to my friend Courtney Land. I didn't come up with this, but the
Yeah.
whole like I've started doing it with my clients is I actually get them. Not only do they discover their physical triggers, they come or like the negative, like negative. It's not negative, but your
I know.
nervous system
It's
triggers, but also
yeah.
your joy triggers. So like, what are the things that give you
Yeah.
life and make you come alive
Yes.
and get you excited and stuff like that? So that's the other element of what we do, and that's all equally important. And it's like
Mhm.
so important. It's just so foundational. But I like with what you're for me in my head, maybe it doesn't make
No, it's
much sense, but like it connects.
yeah. Well, and I think that it comes to like, and I love that you're saying like it's not bad. Like when you can open up, I think that life is 50-50. I
Yeah.
think there's good and bad. And I think the more you open up to the part of the 50-50 that is uncomfortable in both the positive and in quote unquote positive neg, it's like I need a better word for it, but the unpleasant, maybe like the parts of you that like
Yeah.
don't feel very good, then the more you
Hmm.
have access to the parts of like life that do feel really good. And something that we've talked about in coaching is like coming back to that joy in your life, because you can in like finding joy in little moments too. And so I
Hmm.
think that like when you open up to the full spectrum of the stresses, of the stretches, of getting into your nervous system and experiencing everything, the good, the
Hmm.
bad, the ugly, all the parts that you don't like, all the parts that you do like, it just makes life so much more full.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, I'm so
Yeah.
glad.
And
Uh-huh.
I just want to add something too is like
Yeah.
for people who are listening to this, there's the one context I would feel is really important is that everyone has different levels of triggers and trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all in
Mm-hmm.
different places of their story. No one's the same. So I'm like, maybe you're just at the very beginning of like, oh wow, maybe I do get triggered. Or maybe you're like, wow, I'm 10 years into the healing process. Who knows? Like
Yeah.
everyone's going through this. But the thing is too, is that they didn't just it's not like you go to the gym to get stronger. So it's like
Yeah.
we've been on this journey. We've been on in this process for years of like discovering these parts of us. So there's no don't get discouraged or anything when you're like whether you're at the beginning and you're just it's like when you go to the gym for the first time, like you're sore, like it's
Mm-hmm.
painful. And
Yes.
so when you're as you're getting discover like what are the things that make me come alive, but also like what are the things that actually maybe cause me stress and my nervous
Yeah.
system starts to kind of freak out. Like there's like a discovery, there's like you're building the muscle of learning how to love yourself. You're building the muscle
Yes.
of learning about your triggers, the joy
Yeah.
triggers too. Like this is it all takes time and intentionality of like creating these things for yourself.
And I
So
think that like almost creating a protocol when you get triggered is very helpful. So
mhm,
like I noticed last night, it was really interesting. So I was sharing with you beforehand, had some issues with flights. I was debating driving to a mastermind that I'm going to um instead of flying. And my parents were talking to me and they were like, well, we really don't think you should drive. And I was like, well, I'm going to drive. Like, I felt like this, like, part of me that was like, well, I'm going to drive because I think it's the right thing to do. And they will say that from a young age, I was like, apparently, I would say, Maggie, do. Like, Maggie, do when I was like a child. I was like, don't you feed me. I was like, I'll do it myself. I've got like this, again, a fierce
it's amazing.
independent streak to me. But it's also interesting because I notice that from things that happened to me like in my childhood, in middle school and elementary school. I think what happened is that desperation for control became a lot stronger because I felt very out
Mhm.
of control in some situations in my life. So I've done a lot of deep work to understand that and be like, ooh. And so I felt it last night. My shoulders, like, I mean, immediately, if you were to watch a YouTube video of this, hopefully, if you guys end up watching it, like, I literally like felt myself like almost like ready to fight. Like, it's like, again, coming back to what we were talking about in the very beginning, it's the fight, flight, freeze response from your
Mhm.
amygdala that happens. And so I'm like ready to fight. I'm like, no, my way, highway. And so the process, I created a protocol. I notice that I'm doing that. And so I'm like, wow, okay. So first is the awareness. And I'm like, okay, fighting, questioning. Like in the moment, I'm like, just sit with it. Okay. And I was like, I just need to take a couple deep breaths. And so I sat with it. And
Yeah.
then I was like, okay, this came from lack of control in the nature. We've snow right now in Winston. So it's like,
Mhm.
I'm feeling out of control. I'm trying to take back control. But is this the best logical decision? And I was like, if I were to choose, I don't think this is the best decision to drive 9 maybe hours in the snow versus flying and driving an hour and a half. So
Yeah.
yeah, that is my protocol for when I get triggered. I'm like, let's sit with it, understand it, and then choose another way.
Yeah. And then I think the compassion element too is what's the soft emotion under the feeling. So
Mm,
you're the reaction thing is control and
yeah.
maybe anger, frustration, pushback, but
Mm,
underneath that is going to be like a tender soft emotion where it's like,
uh,
I might just be really disappointed too.
I think I'm just
Like,
scared. I was like,
yeah.
that's what it was for me. I was scared.
Yeah, my friend Laura, she narrows it down to three. So it's like tender sad, tender scared, or tender
Mm,
loneliness. And usually it comes back to one of those things where it's
that's
like,
good.
so what were you scared of?
I was scared that I
If you're
was.
willing to have this on your podcast for your
Oh,
listeners.
of course. Oh my gosh. I love getting into this kind of stuff. I'm just writing it down. Tender, scared, or tender, lonely. Um, wow. These are so deep. I hope everyone is taking notes because Jeremy, you're brilliant. But I'm just thinking about like I was tender scared because I don't want to be perceived as someone who is, which is again interesting that I'm trying to control others' perception of me because that I know that is
Yeah,
not within my bounds of control. But and that always does make me more scared when I'm trying to control others. So
yeah,
I am scared that I'm going to be seen as someone who is flaky, late, someone who isn't on it. And because in the past
yeah,
I have been perceived like that, especially the person who has ADHD. And I
mhm,
work so hard to present something different in the world. And I was actually late for this podcast and I was like beating the shit out of myself when I was like, you can't be late again.
yeah,
And I was like, no, it was like, because I'm scared. I'm scared that people are going to perceive me as someone who isn't put together or someone who doesn't, deeper than that, someone who doesn't care about others.
yeah. So what if you don't care about others? What's like, what do you, yeah, what
I
else? Like,
do
what's behind
though.
it? Yeah, the thing is you do, but what if you are perceived as someone who doesn't care about others? Like, what's behind that?
Mm, I think that if I were to go in a little deeper and be like, I want to be liked because I think in the past, again, to that like middle school situation, I was in a lot
Yeah,
of neglect, isolation, and serious loneliness. And
yeah.
like y'all, I don't know if I've ever shared this on the podcast, but I was full on mean girls eating lunch in the bathroom, like walked into the cafeteria and just got everyone looked at me because of something that had happened. And I literally ate by myself for about 6 months. And it was like one of the
Oh,
hardest months of my like, yeah, I was like in a very dark place mentally, like considered ending things. So it's like that is a huge trigger for me whenever I'm like, I want to be
yeah,
accepted and a part of the crowd because I've been a part of the crowd. And for me, it kind of was like I know we talk on the podcast about like emotional danger versus physical danger. And I think that my brain perceives the emotional danger of being outside of the crowd as like a physical danger. Cause at one point in my life, it was like I was like life or death kind of
totally.
situation, like physically.
Yeah,
So now my brain is like, if someone doesn't like you, it's life or death again.
yeah,
Lots of fear.
yeah. So feeling pretty scared. But then you also
Yeah.
said lonely, so there's some like loneliness there. And then
Oh yeah. In sadness, all the tenderness.
so then you can ask yourself that question like, what did little Megan need? Like when she was sad and scared, like what did she need?
She needed to be seen, heard, and understood.
Yeah. And so those are
Yeah.
there's like exercises and tools that you can do to give you, like, we won't go into it now because this is like
Yeah.
tender stuff and I want to honor your story and who you are,
Oh
not like
yeah.
put you on blast or anything. But
No, I love
there's
it.
like there's a part where it's like those are gifts that you can give to yourself. Like you needed those things in that time.
Mm,
So little
mhm,
Megan in middle school is like, she needs to feel seen and
mhm.
accepted and heard. And so all these, when there's those things aren't being met, it starts to create pain, and pain doesn't just go away. It has to
Yeah.
be like sat with. So then there's the elements of like, you could actually, there's tools and there's things available
Mhm.
where you can actually sit with yourself and have those tools to be able to give those gifts to yourself, because ultimately that's what you need.
Yeah.
So what happens is someone gets triggered, they have that reactionary, like, I'm gonna fight, flight, whatever,
Yeah.
and then that's the reactionary. So behind
Mhm.
the reactionary is an emotion
Yes.
every time, 100% every single
Uh-huh.
time. There's some kind of emotion, but we suppress it. Our nervous
Mhm.
system says, no. We're like, no.
No, it's like a porcupine or like a pufferfish.
Uh-huh. And it's because we want to protect ourselves from that feeling, the
Yeah.
emotion that's there. And what it might be is like, oh, I'm just really sick, sad. Like I'm
Mhm.
really, like when Haley leaves, Haley's out of town right now. Um, I've gotten a lot better, but historically, when she would
Mhm.
leave, I would get really depressed, and I'd be like, "Why am
Yeah.
I depressed? I don't understand. Life is great." But then I understood over time and years, and kind of sitting with it, like, "Oh, I just feel real. I get really scared because I had a lot of loneliness growing up." And I'm like, "Is she?" And then like,
Yeah.
so what it is like, am I going to be abandoned? And I had to get
Yes.
real about like sitting
Oh
with those
yeah.
things. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of times what people forget is that behind those triggers that are trying to like protect us are tender emotions that need to be sat with. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with them. And it's really beautiful. And that's why I sit with my daughter now, so that
Mhm.
she can learn to sit with those uncomfortable feelings, because they're going to come up in life. It doesn't
Yes.
matter how great of a parent I am, like things are going to happen. It's life. Bad things happen.
Yeah. I I really love that. And I love that it's instead of just trying to, I think that sometimes I love as a parent that you're opening your daughter up to all of it, because I think a lot of times as I know I'm not a parent, but like as a teacher, it would be tempting for me to create an experience for my students where I would only want them to feel happy, only want them to feel
Yeah,
joy. I wouldn't want them to get a bad grade on a test. I wouldn't want them to see that, because I didn't want them to feel the other half. Instead of, and this is just an alternative. And again, I'm not telling anyone how to parent, but just like instead of avoiding half of your child's life, what if you opened them up to all of it? You're like, here, not
yeah,
only is this something that's going to happen in your life, but here I can help you now while you're under my roof before you go out into the quote unquote real world. And you can experience all of this stuff while in the tender care of my love and protection. And you feel
yeah.
the safety net, you know? I think that's
That's
a
really good.
beautiful opportunity there.
I don't know how you were a teacher, because if you hear the noise, it snowed in Winston, so there's like
Yes.
snowplow truck drivers going by.
Oh, that's good for
Um,
me driving today, just to the airport.
yeah, it's actually snowing again right now. So, um, I
Wow,
yeah,
but yeah,
for
just
your
as a teacher, it was one of those things that
I
like,
oh
yeah,
I like, so what you're, but yeah, sorry, I get so distracted too. So, anyways,
we're a good
you've
match.
experienced that with me, yeah. So I don't know how you could do it as a teacher, because for me it's like the sober the reality is the sobering reality is that not every kid is going to have parents that can give them everything that they need, and it's going to be painful. So if there's like
Mm,
addiction, or there's like negligence,
mhm.
abuse, whatever kind, like I don't know how teachers show up and they see these kids and they're like hungry to have these gifts, these, we could say that the gifts are what the definition of love is, like teaching,
Yeah,
protection, all those things, like.
yeah.
And so I don't know how you did it, just like showing up like that, because I'm just like, oh man, I can't do it.
I will
It's
say I definitely like I don't think there's a such thing as perfection ever. And I never think I even came close to that standard. But one of the things I would do is like when kids were upset, I would just like hold them while they would cry and things like that and just be like, yeah, I'm like, it's okay. I'm like, I get why you're upset right now. You can stay here for as long
yeah,
as you need, you know? And like with the grading and tests like that, like I know there's so many stigmas in our society about like, and I think it's just so frustrating because like a failing grade in school is bad, but like if you fail more in life and learn from it and grow from it, the better you do. So it's like
yeah,
that's just a frustrating like switch that I think that some of the most successful people fail the most. And so I tried to be like, this is a great learning opportunity. You learned half of this stuff. Let's go through and let's figure out, okay. And I didn't do this every time. Again, not a perfect teacher,
yeah,
but if I were to go
totally.
back, I would, again, because we're not graded on social emotional, again, as a teacher, not getting accolades based on that, but I'd be like, okay, let's understand this. Let's understand why. Let's do some rotation groups. Okay, everyone didn't get this problem. Let's try and figure it out another way, just like in this group, and trying to make it so that it was like, yeah, everybody makes mistakes. I remember like one time I was like, let's just celebrate our failures. And so that got to the point where people were like, you failed. And I was like, okay, maybe that's like not necessarily the way we're supposed to go. But I was like trying to get them in this idea that like the more failures you can have, the better. And I
Mhm.
think that failure can cause a lot of stress and trigger a lot of people. And I think that's one thing that is actually going to
Yeah,
stretch you to grow, especially towards your dreams, you
yeah,
know?
it's true.
Mm,
Yeah, and if you can sit with that
yeah.
and actually be okay with failure, and then you have that resiliency, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
you're right, that's a part of the journey of the stretching and versus the stressing. It's like
Yeah.
not necessarily an easy thing, but you said it really well.
Well, and I think just to kind of wrap up here, every session that we do, I always give people a breakthrough. And I'm like, okay, what was your breakthrough for today? So I try and challenge myself to think about like what was a breakthrough for me in this podcast. And I think something that I really want everyone to walk away with is this idea that whenever you're feeling triggered, trying to come back and figure out if you were to think, okay, am I tender sad? Am I tender scared? Or am I tender lonely right now? And just being like,
Mhm.
okay, of those three, what needs to be heard right now? What needs to be compassionately understood before I can move on? I think that's something that I'm going to take away from this podcast for sure. Is
Yeah,
there anything that you
awesome.
want people to take away with?
That's really great. Yeah. I mean, so you mentioned the nervous system, the vagus nerve, depending on where you're from. But I
Yeah.
like, so if you check out my podcast, Creating Emotional Intelligence,
Yes.
the last episode was talking about, so chiropractors work with the nervous system. So they have a really good understanding of it. So I had a
Oh,
chiropractor come on and explain the nervous system and actually talk about the vagus nerve. And it was really good.
that's really,
So
really
if they want
cool.
to learn more, if they want to learn more about that, that's really um, an amazing resource. I don't know if you ever actually met Tom. He goes to top tier. So he
No. Oh my
owns
gosh.
he owns Twin City Health in town. So if you know Twin City Health,
No, but I will find
yeah,
him because I do need a chiropractor in the area.
yeah, he's pretty great. So, but yeah, so that's great. So just knowing that
Yeah.
like when you get triggered, there's nothing wrong with you at all. There's nothing
Yes.
to be fixed or anything like that. It's literally just choosing to sit with yourself and be like, hey, take as long as you need. I'm here with you no
Mhm.
matter what. I'm for you. I'm your biggest fan. I love you. And I mean, we may not understand it, but we're going to do this. We're going to be with each other. And then you can ask, like, hey, what were the emotions that were going on? And then a really powerful question to ask yourself. One little phrase, it's 2 words. I learned it from Laura, is
Mhm.
what else? You can say, hey, it
Yes.
sounds like you're really scared, and just sit with it. Like, what else? Like, just get curious. Like, what else was there?
Yeah. Oh,
And
that's
just keep
brilliant.
following it.
And then I think, oh, I loved this whole conversation. I think that this is going to be an episode that people will come back to pretty frequently because this is something that I think we haven't really talked as much about on the podcast about healing your traumas from your past and really your triggers and your stress and figuring out solutions for that. So thank you so, so much for coming on. I know there are going
Yeah,
to
it was
be
fun.
this was really fun. I know that a lot of people will probably want to work with you because what you're doing is really awesome. So how could people connect to you?
Yeah, so you can find the podcast, Creating Emotional Intelligence. And then you can check out my website, intentcc.com. It has like the contact information. So
Awesome.
intent, INTENT, CC stands for coaching and consulting. So yeah,
Excellent.
that's where people can find me.
Awesome. And you also have a Facebook group too, right?
Yeah. So if you go
That's
to,
a good one.
yeah, that's true. If you go to Facebook and then you go into groups, you just type in CEI space podcast.
Yeah.
And then you can just say, when it says, how did you find it? You can say Megan. So
Yeah, and you'll know. Well, and you get to answer a lot of questions that will, I think, make you think a little bit deeper, which I just think is really cool. I would just love to highlight that, and I'll link all of your social media, your website, all of that on the podcast. So just in case people are like driving or things like that, don't worry, all this will be
no,
linked.
thank you.
Yeah, Jeremy, thank you so much for coming on. I'm
Yeah.
so glad you joined us. Thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.